The morning mist hung thick over Devil's Notch, clinging to the pine needles like wet cotton. Nathan Walker shifted his weight slowly, feeling the cold seep through his buckskin jacket as he lay flat against the granite ledge. Below him, the narrow canyon twisted between sheer walls of rock, its floor still lost in shadow. He'd been tracking the outlaw band for 3 days now, following their careless trail of broken branches and horse droppings through the high country. Ridge, as most folks called him on account of his habit of keeping to the high ridges, knew these mountains better than any man alive. 20 years of trapping beaver, hunting elk, and trading with the peaceful bands had taught him every game trail, every hidden spring, every cave that could shelter a man through a mountain storm. But these weren't the kind of men he usually tracked. These were outcasts, thrown out by their own people for crimes that made even hardened frontier folk speak in whispers. The stockade came into view as the sun climbed higher, burning off patches of mist. It was an old thing, built back when the Hudson Bay Company tried to run a trading post up here, maybe 30 years gone. The logs were gray with age, some rotting through, but the basic structure still held. From his vantage point, Nathan could see movement in the compound, figures stirring around a dying campfire, horses picketed near what used to be the storage shed. He counted 12 men, maybe 13, hard to tell with some still wrapped in blankets, each one armed. That much was certain. He could see the glint of rifle barrels propped against the wall, the bulge of pistols at their hips. Nathan's jaw tightened. Too many for a direct confrontation, even with his Hawken rifle and the element of surprise. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Soft, barely audible over the morning bird song, but unmistakably human. A ragged breath, followed by another. Not from the men around the fire, but from somewhere near the center of the compound. Nathan eased forward, using a fallen log for cover, until he could see past the broken gate. His stomach clenched at what he saw. A figure slumped against a wooden post in the middle of the yard, arms pulled back and secured with rope. Even from this distance, he could see the torn fabric of what had once been a decent dress, the tangled mass of light-colored hair. The breathing came from her, shallow, pained, but steady. Nathan had seen plenty of hard things in his years in the mountains. He'd found the remains of wagon trains that didn't make it through early snow, seen what wolves could do to a wounded elk, watched men die from infected wounds with no doctor for 100 miles. But something about this sight, the deliberate cruelty of it, made his hands tighten on his rifle stock. He watched for another hour, memorizing routines, noting weaknesses. Most of the outlaws seemed focused on their morning meal, passing around a bottle of what looked like whiskey despite the early hour. Their leader, a man with a distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jaw, kicked one of the younger men awake with unnecessary force. No discipline, Nathan noted. No proper watch posted. They felt safe here, hidden in their mountain stronghold. The woman at the post hadn't moved except for that labored breathing. Nathan could see dark stains on the ground around her. Blood, most likely, though whether old or fresh he couldn't tell from here. Her head hung forward, obscuring her face, but something in her posture suggested she was conscious, just conserving what little strength remained. The sun climbed higher, and the outlaws began to disperse. Some headed for the horses, others disappeared into the various buildings. The scarred leader remained by the fire with 2 others, gesturing animatedly as he talked. Nathan counted again, 8 men visible now, which meant at least 4 or 5 were somewhere he couldn't see them. He'd have to wait for dark, he decided. But as he watched, one of the men approached the woman with a bucket. Instead of offering water, he dumped it over her head, laughing as she gasped and shuddered. Her head came up then, and Nathan caught a glimpse of her face, young, maybe 25, with the kind of determined set to her jaw that suggested she hadn't broken yet, despite everything. The man reached for her, and Nathan's finger found his trigger. But the woman was faster, somehow, even bound. She managed to slam her forehead into the man's nose when he leaned too close. He staggered back, cursing and bleeding, while his companions roared with laughter. The scarred leader stood, his amusement gone. He backhanded the woman hard enough to snap her head to the side, then turned on his bleeding subordinate with a stream of words Nathan couldn't quite catch. The message was clear enough, though. Hands off until he said otherwise. Nathan eased back from his position, mind working through possibilities. He'd found what he was looking for. Confirmed the stories that had filtered down from the mountain settlements about a ranch family attacked, the daughter taken. Hannah Weiss, if the description matched. German immigrants who'd built a small spread near Cedar Valley, trying to make an honest living raising cattle and growing vegetables for the mining camps. He'd seen what was left of the ranch. The bodies had been buried by neighbors by the time he arrived, but the burned timbers and scattered belongings told the story clear enough. The tracks had led him here, to this festering sore of a hideout where men who'd been cast out even by their own people gathered to plan their raids. The smart thing would be to ride back down, gather a proper posse, come back with enough men to clean out this nest properly. But that would take days, maybe a week, and from what he'd just seen, the woman might not have that long. These men weren't keeping her for ransom. German immigrant families rarely had money worth the taking. No, she was being kept for other reasons, and none of them good. Nathan made his decision. He'd wait for nightfall, then see what could be done. 1 man against 13 wasn't good odds, but he'd faced worse, and sometimes, in the mountains, 1 man who knew what he was doing could accomplish what a dozen couldn't. He spent the remaining daylight hours studying every approach, every possible escape route. The stockade had been built with defense in mind, but 30 years of weather and neglect had opened gaps. The main gate was the obvious entry, but Nathan noted where the wall logs had rotted near the ground on the north side, where a determined man might squeeze through. More importantly, he spotted the old well near the east wall, covered now with planks, probably dry, but it might connect to the natural limestone caves that riddled these mountains. As afternoon faded to evening, the outlaws gathered again for their meal. Nathan watched them pass bottles freely, noted how their voices grew louder and less cautious as darkness fell. No one checked on the woman, though she remained where she was. Occasionally shifting position as much as her bonds allowed, the moon wouldn't rise until near midnight. That would be his time. Nathan checked his equipment methodically. His Hawken was loaded with a fresh charge, the cap secure on the nipple, his pistol, a Navy Colt, rode at his hip with all 6 chambers loaded despite the risk. This wasn't a time for the usual precaution of leaving one empty under the hammer. His knife, sharp enough to shave with, rested in its sheath at the small of his back. He had rope, coiled and ready. Lucifer matches wrapped in oilcloth, a small flask of whiskey, not for drinking but for cleaning wounds. Everything a man needed for what might be his last night in the mountains, as full dark settled over Devil's Notch. Nathan began his descent. The moon hadn't risen yet when Nathan slipped through the rotted section of the stockade wall. The gap was tight. He had to remove his possibles bag and push it through first, but years of moving through narrow mountain passes had taught him how to make his broad shoulders compact. Inside, he crouched in the deep shadow cast by the storage shed, listening. Most of the outlaws had retired to the main building, their drunken voices carrying through the thin walls. A single guard sat by the dying fire, his head nodding forward as he fought sleep. The woman remained at the post, a dark shape in the starlight. Nathan moved closer, placing each foot with the care of a man who'd stalked elk through dry autumn leaves. 20 feet, 10, close enough now to see the iron shackles on her ankles, connected by a short chain to a ring driven into the post's base. His heart sank. He'd hoped for rope, something his knife could handle silently. The woman's head lifted slightly as he approached, her eyes, reflecting what little light the stars provided, fixed on him with surprising alertness. She didn't cry out, didn't even draw a sharp breath, just watched as he eased around to where her hands were bound. "Easy now," he whispered, barely louder than a breath. "I'm getting you out." She nodded once, a tiny movement. Up close, he could see the bruises on her face, the dried blood at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes, blue or gray, hard to tell in the darkness. held steady on his. The rope around her wrists was hemp, swollen tight with dried blood. Nathan's knife made short work of it, though he had to saw carefully to avoid cutting her. She bit down hard on her lip as circulation returned to her hands, but made no sound. The shackles were another matter. The lock was solid iron, old but well made. Nathan examined it quickly, then looked at the post itself. The wood was pine, weathered but still sound except where the chain ring was anchored. Years of rain had pooled there, starting the slow work of rot. He made his decision. Drawing his Colt, he pressed the barrel against the wood just above the iron ring. It would make noise, no avoiding that, but one shot might be mistaken for a hunter in the distance, or a guard shooting at shadows. "When I fire," he breathed in her ear. "We run for the north wall. Can you move?" She tested her legs, wincing. "I'll move," she whispered back. Her voice was hoarse but determined, with the slight accent of German-born parents. Nathan cocked the pistol, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The .36 caliber ball smashed into the rotted wood, sending splinters flying. The post cracked but didn't break. Shouts erupted from the main building. The guard by the fire jerked awake, fumbling for his rifle. No time for subtlety now. Nathan grabbed the chain near the post and yanked with all his strength. The weakened wood gave way with a splintering crack, the iron ring pulling free. The woman stumbled forward, the chain between her ankles clanking with each step. "This way!" Nathan grabbed her arm, half carrying her toward the gap in the wall. Behind them, outlaws poured from the building, their shouts filling the night. They'd made it halfway when the first shot cracked overhead. Nathan spun, firing twice at the muzzle flash. Heard a yelp of pain. The woman surprised him by scooping up a fist-sized rock and hurling it at another figure rushing them from the side. It caught the man in the temple, dropping him cold. They squeezed through the gap just as more shots peppered the wall behind them. But Nathan had scouted this approach carefully. 10 yards from the wall, the ground dropped away into a steep ravine choked with deadfall and loose rock. In daylight, it would be treacherous. In darkness, it was nearly suicidal. "Trust me," he said, and before she could respond, he wrapped an arm around her waist and plunged over the edge. They slid more than climbed, Nathan using his free hand to grab at roots and rocks to control their descent. The woman didn't scream, just pressed tight against him, her newly freed hands clutching his jacket. Behind them, torches flared to life in the stockade, casting wild shadows on the canyon walls. 30 feet down, Nathan's boots hit a narrow ledge. He caught their weight, muscles straining, then edged sideways along it. The woman's chain scraped against stone with every movement, the sound carrying clearly in the night air. "There!" A shout from above. "I see movement!" A rifle cracked, the ball whining off rock inches from Nathan's head. He quickened his pace, practically dragging the woman along the ledge until it connected with a game trail he'd marked earlier. They plunged into the cover of thick pines just as more shots rang out. But Nathan knew they were far from safe. These outlaws knew the mountains too, and come daylight, they'd be tracking. The chain on the woman's ankles left marks a blind man could follow, and the sound would give them away in any attempt at stealth. He led them up the trail at the best pace they could manage, the woman's breathing growing more labored with each step. After 20 minutes of hard climbing, they reached a small cave he'd noted during his reconnaissance, really just an overhang of rock with some fallen boulders creating a hidden space behind. "In here," he said, guiding her into the darkness. Only when they were well back from the entrance did he risk striking a match. The brief flare of light showed her face clearly for the first time. Younger than he'd thought, maybe 22 or 23, with light brown hair that had probably been neatly braided before her ordeal. Her dress was torn in several places, dark stains that were certainly blood marking the fabric, but it was her eyes that held his attention, steady and assessing, without the glazed look he'd seen in folks pushed past their breaking point. "We need to do something about that chain," he said as the match died. "The noise will get us killed." "You have a file?" she asked. "No, but I've got this." He pulled cloth from his possibles bag, strips torn from an old shirt. "We wrap the chain. Muffle the sound. Not perfect, but better than nothing. She held still as he worked, wrapping the links carefully. His knuckles brushed her ankle, feeling the raw skin where the shackles had rubbed. She drew a sharp breath but didn't pull away. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked. "Hannah. Hannah Weiss." A pause. "You're the one they call Ridge Walker. I heard talk of you in Cedar Valley. Just Nathan will do." He finished wrapping the chain, testing to make sure it would hold. "We need to keep moving. They'll search every hiding spot within 5 miles come sunrise." "I know a place," she said quietly. "Higher up. My father. We hunted these mountains before." Her voice caught slightly, the first sign of emotion she'd shown. Nathan understood. No need to finish that sentence, to speak of what those animals had done to her family. "Can you make it? We're talking about a hard climb in the dark." She was already pushing herself to her feet. "I'll make it. I didn't survive 3 days in that place to die on a mountainside." They emerged from the cave into a night now lit by a rising crescent moon. Nathan could see torches moving in the valley below, search parties spreading out from the stockade, but they were searching the obvious routes, the easy paths. They didn't know these mountains held secrets that only years of patient exploration could reveal. Hannah led the way now, her movements sure despite the awkward restriction of the chain. She took them up a route Nathan hadn't known existed, through a crack in what looked like solid rock that opened into a climbing traverse along the mountain's face. Even with his experience, he found himself impressed by her knowledge of the terrain. An hour of steady climbing brought them to a wider ledge where she paused, breathing hard. Nathan pulled out his water flask, offered it to her. She drank sparingly, like someone who knew the value of rationing supplies. "How much further?" he asked. "Another hour, maybe less." She handed back the flask. "There's an old mine shaft, not for silver or gold. My father thought it might be an old Spanish dig for turquoise. It goes back into the mountain, connects to natural caves. Fresh water seep in the back." Nathan nodded. It sounded perfect. Shelter, water, and probably unknown to the outlaws. But he could see Hannah was flagging, her burst of energy after the escape giving way to exhaustion. 3 days of captivity, lack of food, the beatings she'd obviously endured. It was catching up to her. "Here," he said, moving beside her. "Lean on me." She hesitated, that German immigrant pride showing through. Then practicality won out, and she accepted his support. Together, they continued up the mountain, pursued by men who'd forgotten what it meant to be human, guided by stars that didn't care about the struggles of those below. Behind them, the torches spread wider, but also lower, the searchers following the logical escape routes down toward the valleys. Nathan allowed himself a grim smile. Let them search the easy paths. He and Hannah would take the hard road, the one that led up and over, through places where only eagles and mountain sheep normally ventured. The chain caught on rocks twice more before they reached Hannah's hidden mine, and both times Nathan freed it without comment. He was already planning what he'd need to cut it properly. A cold chisel and hammer from his cache of tools, or maybe the right-shaped stones to wear through a link. But first, they had to survive the night and what would surely be a determined pursuit come daylight. The mine entrance, when they finally reached it, was nearly invisible, just a darker shadow among dark rocks, partially concealed by a fall of stones that looked natural but had probably been placed deliberately. Hannah led the way inside without hesitation, proving she knew this place well. 20 feet in, the passage opened into a small chamber. Nathan lit another match, saw old support beams still solid after who knew how many years, and as promised, the glint of water seeping down the back wall into a natural basin. "We'll be safe here for tonight," Hannah said, sinking down against the wall. "They don't know this place exists." Nathan hoped she was right, but he'd learned long ago that hope wasn't a strategy. As she curled into an exhausted sleep, he positioned himself where he could watch the entrance, rifle across his knees, and settled in to wait for dawn. Dawn came slowly to the high country, painting the peaks pink while the valleys remained in shadow. Nathan had dozed fitfully through the night, jerking awake at every sound that might be pursuit. But the mine had remained undiscovered, and Hannah had slept deeply, her body finally claiming the rest it desperately needed. He studied her in the growing light filtering through the entrance. The bruises on her face had darkened to purple and yellow, but the swelling had gone down some. She'd curled into herself while sleeping, arms wrapped protective around her middle, but her breathing was steady and deep. Nathan eased out of the mine to scout their surroundings. The morning air bit sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. No smoke from campfires, no voices carrying on the wind. He spotted eagle sign on the ledges above, a good omen. Eagles didn't linger where men moved frequently. Back inside, he found Hannah awake, sitting up against the cave wall. She'd used some of the seep water to clean her face, revealing more clearly the determined set of her features. "We need to work on those shackles," Nathan said, setting down his rifle. "Can't travel far with them on." She extended her legs, studying the iron bands. "My father had tools cached near here, if they're still there." "Show me." The cache was cunningly hidden beneath a flat stone 50 yards from the mine entrance. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the practical tools of a frontier farmer, including a cold chisel and a small sledgehammer. Hannah's father had been a thinking man, preparing for contingencies. They carried the tools back to the mine. Nathan positioned the chisel against one of the chain links, Hannah holding it steady while he swung the hammer. The ringing of metal on metal echoed in the small space, each blow sending vibrations up the chisel. "Hold it firm," he said. "This might take a while." It took nearly an hour of steady work, switching positions when their hands cramped. The chain was good iron, made to last. But finally, a crack appeared in the link, then widened with each blow until it snapped clean through. Hannah drew her first unrestricted breath in days, stretching her legs fully. The shackles remained on her ankles. Those would need a blacksmith to remove safely, but at least she could walk normally now. "Thank you," she said simply, rubbing her ankles where the iron had chafed. Nathan was already packing the tools away. "We'll keep these. Might need them again." He paused, then asked, "You mentioned your father hunted these mountains. You know them well?" "Well enough. We ran a small spread down in Cedar Valley, but Papa loved the high country. Said it reminded him of the Alps back home." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands clenched slightly. "He taught me to read sign, set snares, find water. Said a woman ought to know how to take care of herself out here." "Smart man." Nathan pulled out his meager food supplies. "Jerky, parched corn, some dried apples. Eat light. We need to move today. Put more distance between us and them." She took a small portion, chewing slowly. "They'll expect us to run for the settlements. Head down to Cedar Valley or over to Pine Ridge. What do you think we should do instead?" Hannah looked up at him, a ghost of a smile touching her split lip. "Go higher. Circle around through the passes nobody uses this late in the season. Come down behind them." She paused. "Unless you're planning to just get me to safety and be done with it." Nathan studied her carefully. "Is that what you want? To run to safety?" Her jaw tightened. "They killed my parents, my brother, burned everything we'd built." The words came out flat, controlled. "I don't want to just run. The law is 3 days' ride away, and those men will scatter like quail before any marshal gets here." She met his eyes directly. "I'm not talking about becoming like them, but I won't pretend they don't need stopping." Nathan nodded slowly. He'd seen this before in people pushed past a certain point, not the wild need for revenge that burned hot and reckless, but the cold determination to see justice done, one way or another. "First things first," he said. "You need to learn to shoot proper. Can you handle a rifle?" "Papa taught me some. I can hit a barn door at 20 paces. Not good enough." He picked up his Hawken. "This is a .50 caliber. Kicks like a mule but shoots true to 200 yards in the right hands. Here." He showed her how to hold it. Shoulder tight into the curve of the stock, cheek welded to the wood. Her hands were smaller than his, but steady. She sighted down the barrel as he instructed, getting the feel of the weapon. Shooting's only part of it, he continued. Loading's what takes time. Black powder, measured careful. Ball seated firm with the ramrod. Percussion cap on the nipple. And mind you don't put it on until you're ready to shoot. They spent an hour on the basics without firing a shot. No sense advertising their position. Hannah proved a quick study, her movements becoming more confident as she practiced the loading sequence. Her hands didn't shake, even when handling the powder. "What about close work?" she asked. Nathan drew his knife, flipped it to hold by the blade, and offered her the handle. "A gun's no good if someone's already on you. You know how to use this? For skinning game, yes. Different thing entirely." He showed her the basic grips, how to hold it for defense versus offense. "You're not looking to duel someone. Quick and simple. Whatever it takes to get distance so you can use the gun or run." She practiced the movements he showed her, adapting them to her smaller frame. There was something almost unsettling about watching this young woman, still bearing the marks of her captivity, learning the skills of violence with such focused intent. "My mother would be horrified," Hannah said quietly, still working through the knife drills. "She wanted me to be a proper lady. Piano lessons, needlework, reading poetry. Did you learn those things?" "Some, enough to satisfy her." A pause. "She's buried next to Papa now. I don't think she'd begrudge me this." By midday, Nathan judged they'd stayed in one place long enough. He led them out of the mine and up through a series of switchbacks that climbed toward the timberline. Hannah kept pace despite the thin air, though he could see the strain in how she placed her feet, favoring muscles stiff from her ordeal. They stopped at a lookout point where they could see for miles. Below, tiny figures moved along the valley trails, search parties still operating on the assumption their quarry had fled downward. "Fools," Hannah muttered. "Dangerous fools," Nathan corrected. "See there? They've split into 3 groups, military fashion. Someone down there knows what they're doing. The one with the scar, Marcus Briggs, they called him. Used to scout for the army until he got caught selling rifles to hostiles." She spat to the side. "Now he leads that pack of rabid dogs." Nathan filed the name away. "Knowing your enemy was half of surviving them. Come on, I know a place we can cache supplies, maybe even set up a base to work from." The place turned out to be an old trapper's cabin, built into a natural cave formation and invisible from below. The roof had partially collapsed, but the walls still stood solid. More importantly, it commanded a view of 3 different approach routes while having 2 ways out the back. They spent the afternoon making it livable, clearing debris, checking for sign of recent use, setting up basic alarm systems with string and tin cans Nathan had cached there years before. Hannah worked without complaint, though he caught her wincing when she thought he wasn't looking. As evening approached, Nathan set snares along the small game trails he'd marked. First rule of mountain survival, he told Hannah. Always be gathering food, even when you have some. Never know when you'll get the next chance. She watched him work, then tried setting one herself. Her fingers were clumsy with a thin cord at first, but she persisted until she got it right. "Tomorrow," Nathan said as they returned to the cabin, "we start hunting different game. You still sure that's what you want?" Hannah looked out over the darkening valleys, toward where smoke rose from the direction of the stockade. Her hand dropped to the knife at her belt. She'd taken to wearing it after their practice session. "I'm sure," she said quietly. "They took everything from me except my life. Might as well use it for something worthwhile." Nathan nodded. He'd seen hardened mountain men with less resolve than this farmer's daughter showed. Tomorrow, they'd begin turning from prey to predator. But tonight, they'd rest, eat what small game the snares might catch, and prepare for a kind of war that had its own rules up here in the high country. As stars began to appear overhead, Hannah surprised him by asking, "Why did you come for me? You don't know me or my family. This isn't your fight." Nathan considered the question, poking at the small fire they'd risked inside the cabin's sheltered hearth. Man stops seeing wrong and doing something about it. He stops being a man, becomes something else, something less. He glanced at her. Your folks were good people. Heard that much in the settlements. Didn't deserve what happened. Nobody deserves that, she said softly. No, he agreed. They don't. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell complete. Two unlikely allies bound by circumstance and a shared understanding that some things couldn't be left to stand. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, they were safe, fed, and no longer alone in their purpose. The frost lay heavy on the pine needles as Nathan and Hannah crept through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Outlaws' camp at Beaver Pond. 3 days of careful scouting had shown them how the gang had swelled to nearly 20 men, drawn by promises of easy plunder. The pond, fed by mountain runoff, served as their water source and natural gathering point. Nathan bellied down behind a fallen log, Hannah beside him. Below, horses stood hobbled in rope corrals, their breath steaming in the cold air. Most of the outlaws still slept, bedrolls scattered around dying campfires. Only 2 sentries walked the perimeter, and they moved with the careless confidence of men who believe themselves hunters, not hunted. Remember, Nathan whispered, we're not here to fight, just to make them hurt. Hannah nodded, checking the load on the old Springfield rifle they'd found in her father's cache. She'd practiced with it for hours, learning its quirks, until she could hit a playing card at 50 yards. They'd prepared carefully for this moment, the night before. Nathan had mixed black powder with slow-burning hemp rope, creating delayed fuses. These were now tied to small charges positioned around the camp's uphill side, ready to spook the horses downslope when lit. Nathan struck a lucifer, touching it to the first fuse. It caught, sparking as it burned toward the charge. He lit 2 more in quick succession, then tapped Hannah's shoulder. Time to move to their shooting positions. The first charge went off with a sharp crack, echoing across the water. Horses whinnied in alarm. Pulling against their hobbles, the second blast followed. Then the third, in the camp. Men jerked awake, shouting in confusion. That's when the horses broke loose, whether from Nathan cutting the rope corrals in the night or the animals' own panic. The entire remuda burst free, thundering down through the camp. Men dove aside, cursing as hooves churned through their bedrolls and scattered their gear. Now, Nathan said. He and Hannah fired almost simultaneously, aiming high but close enough to keep the chaos going. Nathan's Hawken boomed, the heavy ball smashing into a coffee pot by the main fire, sending hot liquid spraying. Hannah's Springfield cracked, her shot splintering the wooden frame of a pack saddle. They reloaded with practiced efficiency, fired again. Nathan put a ball through a water barrel, starting a leak. Hannah's shot knocked a rifle from its prop against a tree, well away from any of the scrambling outlaws. By now, the camp was in complete disarray. Half-dressed men ran after horses, others grabbed for weapons, none sure where the attack was coming from. The echoes off the mountain walls made it sound like shots from a dozen different positions. "Move!" Nathan commanded. They belly-crawled backward, then rose and ran along the pre-planned route. Behind them, return fire cracked wildly, the outlaws shooting at shadows and echoes. Nathan had chosen their positions carefully. Good cover, clear retreat paths, and the morning sun would be in the outlaws' eyes if they tried to pursue uphill. They reached the first waypoint, a cluster of boulders, and paused to catch their breath. Down below, the chaos continued. Nathan counted only about half the horses still in sight. The rest had scattered into the forest, and it would take hours, maybe days, to round them all up. "Second phase," he said. They circled wide, coming at the pond from the north side. "Here." Nathan had prepared something special the night before. The outlaws drew their water from a small inlet where the stream fed the pond. He'd found a natural clay deposit upstream and spent hours creating a dam. Mixing in bitter herbs, Hannah knew. Nothing poisonous. Her principles wouldn't allow that, but enough to make the water unpalatable and cause stomach cramping. Hannah kept watch while Nathan broke the small dam. Cloudy, herb-laden water flowed down toward the pond, turning the clear inlet murky brown. "That'll take a few hours to clear," he said with satisfaction. "And they'll think twice about drinking it even then." They were about to withdraw when voices approached. 2 outlaws, sent to investigate the water source. Nathan pushed Hannah behind a boulder and drew his knife. The men came into view, one tall and gangly, the other short with a scruff of red beard. Both carried rifles, but loosely, more concerned with complaining than watching for danger. "Fool's errand," the tall one was saying. "Ain't nobody up here, probably just rock slide spooked them horses. Briggs says check. We check." Redbeard replied. "You want to tell him different?" They were passing close, too close. Nathan coiled, ready to spring, but Hannah put a hand on his arm. She picked up a rock, waited for the right moment, then threw it into the brush 20 yards to their left. Both outlaws spun toward the sound, rifles coming up. In that moment of distraction, Nathan and Hannah slipped away to the right, using the thick undergrowth for cover. They were 50 yards gone before they heard the men arguing about whether to investigate the noise or return to camp. The third phase of their harassment came that afternoon. Nathan had identified the supply train the outlaws were expecting, weekly provisions brought up from a corrupt merchant in Valleytown who didn't ask questions about his customers. The pack train usually took the main trail, guarded by 2 or 3 men. Nathan and Hannah set up at a narrow spot where the trail squeezed between a cliff face and a steep drop-off. They'd strung a rope across at knee height, hidden in the grass, and piled rocks above. Ready to roll. The pack train appeared right on schedule, 6 mules loaded with supplies, led by 2 guards with a third bringing up the rear. Nathan waited until the lead mules were past their position, then yanked the rope taut. The lead mule hit the rope and stumbled, causing a chain reaction as the others bunched up in confusion. At the same moment, Hannah pushed the first rocks over the edge. Not aimed at anyone, they weren't murderers, but crashing down close enough to panic the animals. The mules did what mules do when startled. They sat down, brayed, and refused to budge. The guards cursed, trying to control the animals while watching for attack. Nathan put a shot into the ground near the lead guard's feet, sending him dancing backward. In the chaos, several pack saddles slipped, spilling their contents down the slope. Bags of flour burst on the rocks. Salt pork rolled into the ravine, and a precious keg of whiskey bounced twice before shattering against a boulder. The guards finally got the mules moving, retreating back down the trail rather than trying to push through. They'd lost maybe a third of their supplies, and the rest would arrive late and rattled. More importantly, word would spread that supplying the outlaw camp had become dangerous. Nathan and Hannah made one more stop before heading back to their hidden cabin. They'd discovered where the outlaws had cached their ammunition, a small cave near the main camp, guarded by a single man who spent more time dozing than watching. They waited until the guard stepped away to relieve himself. Then Hannah kept watch while Nathan worked. He didn't steal the ammunition. That would be too obvious. Instead, he carefully opened several kegs of powder and mixed in sand and ground charcoal. Not enough to be noticed, but enough to cause misfires and fouled barrels. Some of the paper cartridges got the same treatment, made to look untouched. By the time they made it back to their cabin, the sun was setting behind the western peaks. They were both exhausted, but satisfied. In one day, they'd cost the outlaws half their horses, fouled their water supply, disrupted their provisions, and compromised their ammunition. "How long before they realize it's just 2 of us?" Hannah asked as she cleaned her rifle. "Doesn't matter," Nathan replied. "By then, they'll be jumping at shadows, suspecting every sound. Fear does half our work for us." She nodded, understanding. They weren't trying to defeat 20 men in open combat. They were trying to break them, make life in these mountains so miserable, so uncertain, that the gang would fracture and flee. "What's next?" she asked. "We let them stew for a day or 2. Let the bad water and fouled powder do their work. Then we hit them again. Somewhere else, some other way." He looked at her seriously. "You did good today. Your father would be proud." Hannah's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of her father, but she nodded. "He always said the mountains could be friend or enemy, depending on how you treated them." "Smart man," Nathan said again. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we scout their response, see who's still with them and who's had enough. As Hannah curled up in her blankets, Nathan sat by the cabin's entrance, keeping first watch. Below, in the valleys, he could see the distant flicker of campfires, more than usual. The outlaws were nervous now, posting extra guards, keeping fires burning through the night. Good, he thought. Let them lose sleep. Let them wonder when the next strike would come. Let them learn what it meant to be hunted in country that had turned against them. The mountain war had begun in earnest, and Nathan intended to teach these men why the old-timers said the high country always collected its due from those who violated its unwritten laws. The abandoned Eagle's Rest silver mine sat perched on a bare shoulder of mountain, its weathered timbers gray as old bones. Nathan stood at the entrance, studying the layout one final time. A single main shaft led into the mountain, with a ventilation chimney climbing up through 30 feet of rock. What the outlaws wouldn't know, what only someone who'd wintered in these mountains would know, was that the mine connected through a natural fissure to a cave system that emerged a quarter-mile away. "You sure about this?" Hannah asked, checking the loads on both rifles they'd positioned inside. "Sure as a man can be about poking a rattlesnake den," Nathan replied. He'd spent 2 days preparing this killing ground, hauling supplies, testing sightlines, making sure their escape route stayed clear. The plan was dangerous in its simplicity. For the past week, they'd bled the outlaws with hit-and-run tactics until the gang was down to 12 men. The others, having decided easier pickings, waited elsewhere. Those who remained were the hardest cases, including Marcus Briggs with his scarred face and military mind. Now it was time to force a confrontation on ground of their choosing. Hannah took her position at the mine entrance just as the sun crested the eastern peaks. She'd traded her torn dress for canvas trousers and a wool shirt taken from the outlaws as disrupted supplies. Her hair was tied back severe, and the Springfield rifle rested steady in her hands. The frightened girl from the Stockade was gone, replaced by someone harder, focused on a single purpose. Nathan watched her limp theatrically into view of the valley below, favoring her left leg, rifle dragging like it was too heavy to carry. To anyone watching, and he knew scouts were watching, she looked like wounded prey taking desperate shelter. She collapsed dramatically at the mine entrance, then crawled inside just far enough to be visible. Nathan, meanwhile, positioned himself in the shadows 20 feet inside the shaft, where carefully placed mirrors would give him a view of the approach while keeping him invisible. They didn't have long to wait. By noon, riders appeared on the trail below. Nathan counted 8 men, riding cautious but confident. Briggs led them, his scar dark against weathered skin. They'd taken the bait, but not all of them. 4 men stayed back somewhere, probably circling to cut off escape routes. The riders dismounted at the base of the steep trail to the mine, leaving 2 men with the horses. 6 began the climb, spread out in good military fashion, rifles ready. "Steady," Nathan whispered, though Hannah couldn't hear him from her position. The first 2 outlaws reached the small plateau before the mine entrance. They saw Hannah just inside, apparently unconscious, rifle fallen beside her. One gestured to the others, "Easy prey." That's when Hannah rolled onto her back, Springfield coming up smooth and fast. Her first shot took the lead man's center chest, spinning him backward. Nathan's Hawken boomed a heartbeat later, catching the second man before he could react. The remaining 4 scrambled for cover, but the mine entrance created a natural funnel. Hannah had already rolled deeper inside, reloading as Nathan had taught her. His second shot from the shadows dropped a man trying to circle wide. "The shaft!" Briggs roared. "They're bottled up in there." But Nathan had anticipated this. As the outlaws gathered for a rush, he touched flame to a prepared charge. The explosion wasn't meant to kill, just to shower rock and debris across the entrance, forcing them back, buying time. In the confusion, Hannah displaced to her secondary position behind stacked timbers. When the dust cleared and 2 men charged through, she was ready. The Springfield cracked once, twice, and both men stumbled and fell. Briggs himself came next, moving fast and low, army style. Nathan's shot clipped him but didn't drop him. The scarred leader dove behind an ore cart, cursing steadily. "You're trapped," Briggs shouted. "My boys are already climbing to the vent shaft." Give up now and I'll make it quick. Nathan smiled grimly. Let them climb. The ventilation shaft had its own surprises. Loose boards over a 30-foot drop, arranged to look solid until weight hit them. Movement at the entrance. Another outlaw trying his luck. Hannah's shot sent him scrambling back, clutching a bleeding arm. They were learning caution now, but time wasn't on the outlaws' side. Every minute spent here was a minute the town militia might be forming up, word having been carefully spread about where to find the gang. A scream echoed down from above. Someone had found the false floor in the vent shaft the hard way. Briggs cursed louder. Realizing he'd been outmaneuvered, "Rush them," he commanded. "All together." 4 men burst through the entrance in a desperate charge. Nathan dropped one with the Hawken, then drew his Colt for close work. Hannah fired, worked the Springfield's lever, fired again, the mine shaft filled with powder smoke and the thunder of guns. When the smoke cleared, only Briggs remained standing, blood seeping from the graze on his ribs. His men lay groaning or still. He looked between Nathan and Hannah, calculation in his eyes. "The woman," he said, focusing on Hannah. "You're the Weiss girl. Thought you'd be broken by now." "You thought wrong," Hannah replied, rifle trained steady on his chest. Briggs laughed, harsh and bitter. "Your PA squealed like a pig when we—" Hannah's shot cut off his words and his life, the bullet taking him just above the scar. He toppled backward, a look of surprise frozen on his face. "Hannah," Nathan said quietly. "He was reaching for a hideout gun," she said flatly. And maybe he had been. A small derringer was visible in his coat pocket, though his hand hadn't quite reached it. Nathan didn't argue. Justice in the mountains had its own rules, and Briggs had earned his fate a dozen times over. They moved quickly now, knowing the remaining outlaws might regroup. Through the back passage, Nathan had scouted. They emerged into daylight a quarter-mile from the mine. Smoke was already rising from the entrance. Someone had set fire to the timbers, probably hoping to smoke them out. From their vantage point, they watched the surviving outlaws mill about in confusion. Their leader was dead, their numbers halved, and somewhere in these mountains were enemies who knew the terrain better than they ever would. By evening, the remnants of the gang had scattered, riding hard for lower country. Nathan and Hannah tracked them long enough to be sure they weren't doubling back, then made their own way toward Copper Creek. The abandoned mine smoldered behind them, taking its secrets and its dead into the mountain's keeping. Hannah rode one of the captured horses, back straight despite exhaustion and the weight of what they'd done. "It's finished," Nathan said as they made camp for the night. "The killing's finished," Hannah corrected. "The rest—" She touched the shackle scars on her ankles, nearly healed now, but still visible. "The rest might take longer." Nathan understood. They'd won their mountain war, but victories in the wilderness didn't always translate to peace and civilization. Tomorrow they'd face questions, judgment, the weight of law that didn't always account for necessity. But that was tomorrow. Tonight. They rested beside a small fire, 2 unlikely warriors who'd found common cause in the harsh beauty of the high country. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, while somewhere in the darkness a coyote called, wild and free, owing allegiance to no law but survival. "What will you do now?" Nathan asked. "Your family's land is still there." Hannah stared into the fire for a long moment. "I don't know. Can't imagine working that soil alone, walking those rooms." She trailed off, then looked at him directly. "What about you? Back to your mountains?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'll stick around a while, make sure nobody else tries to set up shop in that stockade." She nodded, understanding the unspoken offer. They'd been forged as partners in violence. Perhaps they could learn to be partners in peace as well. The mountains had brought them together, and the mountains would keep their secrets. As the fire burned low, Nathan took first watch from habit, rifle across his knees. But the night remained peaceful, disturbed only by the normal sounds of the wilderness. The time for hunting was over. Now came the harder task of learning to live with what they'd done, and who they'd become in the doing. The rain had turned Copper Creek's main street into a river of mud by the time Nathan and Hannah rode in. Nathan slumped forward in his saddle, the makeshift bandage around his ribs soaked through with blood. The knife wound from Briggs had been deeper than he'd let on, and 2 days of hard riding hadn't helped it any. Hannah kept her horse close to his, ready to steady him if needed. Her own exhaustion showed in the dark circles under her eyes, but she sat straight-backed, alert to any threat. The town looked different to her now, smaller somehow, after weeks in the vast wilderness. They drew stairs as they passed, muddy, blood-stained, armed like frontier fighters rather than decent folk. Hannah still wore the men's clothing she'd adopted, and the Springfield rode across her saddle within easy reach. Women peered from the shop windows. Men stepped out of doorways to watch their passage. "The doctor first," Hannah said firmly when Nathan tried to turn toward the sheriff's office. "The law can wait." Her tone brooked no argument. "You're no good to anyone bled out in the street." The doctor's house sat at the end of Main Street, a tidy clapboard structure with a shingle reading, "Dr. Emil Hoffman, physician and surgeon." Hannah had to help Nathan dismount, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "Dr." Hoffman answered her urgent knocking, a thin, elderly man with gentle hands and sharp eyes. He'd served as a field surgeon during the war between the states, and the sight of a wounded man didn't faze him. "Inside, quickly," he ordered, helping support Nathan's weight. "Margaret, hot water and my surgical kit." They got Nathan onto the examination table, where the doctor cut away the bloody shirt to reveal the wound. It was an ugly thing, a 6-inch gash along the ribs where Briggs's Bowie knife had found its mark during their close-quarters struggle. "Missed the lung. Thank the Lord," Hoffman muttered, probing carefully. "But there's wood splinters in here, probably from the mine timbers." He looked at Hannah. "This'll take time. Are you his wife?" "No," Hannah said, then added more quietly, "A friend." "Well, friend, I'll need you to hold him while I work. Margaret can't stand the sight of blood." What followed was an hour of careful surgery. Nathan gritted his teeth as the doctor cleaned and probed the wound, extracting splinters and debris. Hannah held his shoulders, her hands steady even when he groaned through the whiskey-soaked leather strap between his teeth. "There," Hoffman said finally, threading a needle. "The worst is out. Now to close it up." He glanced at Hannah as he worked. "You're the Weiss girl, aren't you? Heard about what happened to your family?" Hannah's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And this man?" "Nathan Walker. He helped me." The doctor nodded, continuing his careful stitching. "Also heard there was some trouble up in the mountains. Dead outlaws found at the Old Eagle's Rest mine. Is that so?" Hannah kept her voice neutral. Sheriff's been asking questions. Seems those dead men match the description of the gang that's been terrorizing homesteads hereabouts." He tied off the last stitch, then began wrapping clean bandages around Nathan's ribs. "Course, whoever killed them probably did this town a service. Just speaking medically. You understand?" A knock at the door interrupted any response. Margaret Hoffman's nervous voice carried from the front room. "Doctor, Sheriff Morrison is here. Says it's urgent." Hannah's hand moved instinctively toward her rifle, but the doctor placed a calming hand on her arm. "Easy, girl. Tom Morrison's a fair man. Fought beside him at Antietam." He raised his voice. "Send him back. Margaret." Sheriff Morrison proved to be a stocky man in his 40s, with the measured movements of someone who'd learned not to make sudden gestures around nervous folks with guns. His eyes took in the scene, Nathan on the table, Hannah standing protective beside him, both showing clear signs of hard travel and harder fighting. "Miss Weiss," he said, touching his hat brim. "Glad to see you safe. When we found what was left of your family's place." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "And this would be the mountain man who helped you?" "Nathan Walker," Hannah confirmed. "He saved my life." "So I gather." Morrison's eyes lingered on their weapons, the bloodstains, the general air of violence that clung to them. "I've had some interesting reports the past few days. Seems that outlaw gang got itself pretty well shot up. Marcus Briggs among the dead. Neither Nathan nor Hannah responded. Thing is, Morrison continued, I've got dead men scattered across the mountains and 2 people riding in looking like they've been through a war. Town council's going to want answers. There's forms of law to follow, even out here. The law, Nathan said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived, his voice rough with pain. Wasn't there when they burned the Weiss place? Wasn't there when they took Hannah? No, Morrison agreed quietly. It wasn't, and that sits poorly with me. But vigilante justice, self-defense, Hannah interrupted. They came after us. We defended ourselves. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. All of them? At different times and places. They were hunting us, Hannah said steadily. We just got better at it than they were. Morrison sighed, rubbing his jaw. Miss Weiss, I knew your father. Good man. What was done to your family? He shook his head. But I've got a job to do. There'll need to be an inquest. Judge Carpenter's due through next week on his circuit. Until then, he looked between them. I'll need your word you won't leave town. Nathan needs rest anyway. Hannah said, We'll be here. Good enough. Morrison turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, there's not a soul in this town mourning Marcus Briggs or his ilk, but the law's got to have its say. He touched his hat again and left. Doctor, Hoffman finished securing the bandages. He'll need to stay put for a few days. I've got a room upstairs he can use. He looked at Hannah. You got anywhere to stay? Hannah hesitated. Going back to what was left of her family's ranch was unthinkable. The hotel would set tongues wagging even more than they already were. Margaret and I have a spare room. The doctor offered. You look dead on your feet, girl, and someone should keep an eye on your friend here. Over the next days, as Nathan recovered and word spread through the town, the mood shifted gradually. The initial shock and whispers gave way to something else as people learned more details. Sarah Mackenzie, whose husband had been killed by the gang months earlier, brought fresh bread to the doctor's house. Jim Patterson, who'd lost cattle to the Outlaws, stopped by to shake Nathan's hand. The story emerged in pieces. How Nathan had tracked the gang to their hideout, found Hannah prisoner, got her out despite impossible odds. How they'd been hunted through the mountains, forced to fight back. How they'd ended the threat that had terrorized the region for months. Should have been done sooner, Patterson said bluntly. We all knew where that gang was holed up. Just nobody had the sand to do anything about it. But not everyone was supportive. Harold Weaver, who ran the general store and fancied himself a pillar of respectability, made his disapproval known. Taking the law into your own hands is what separates us from savages, he proclaimed to anyone who'd listen. And a young woman, running around in men's clothes, shooting people, it's unseemly. Hannah heard the talk but didn't respond. She spent her days helping Dr. Hoffman tend Nathan and other patients, finding unexpected comfort in the work. Her hands, which had grown steady holding a rifle, proved equally capable with bandages and medicines. Nathan improved quickly, his mountain-hardened constitution serving him well. By the 4th day, he was up and walking, though Hannah had to argue him back to bed when he tried to do too much. The judge comes tomorrow, she reminded him. You need your strength for that. He caught her hand as she adjusted his bandages. Whatever happens, I want you to know, don't, she said quietly. We did what we had to, both of us. That's all that needs saying right now. But the weight of what came next hung between them. The law would have its say, and then decisions would need to be made. The mountains called to Nathan. They always had, and Hannah had to decide whether to try rebuilding on the ashes of her old life or find a new path entirely. That evening, as she helped Margaret Hoffman prepare supper, the older woman said gently, You know, dear, there's no shame in moving on, starting fresh somewhere new. Hannah paused in her kneading of bread dough. My family built something here. It feels wrong to just abandon it. Is it abandoning or is it choosing to live? Margaret asked. That young man upstairs, He looks at you like you hung the moon. And you look at him the same way when you think nobody's watching." Hannah's hands stilled. She hadn't let herself think about that, about what had grown between her and Nathan during their time in the mountains. Partnership born of necessity, deepened by shared danger and trust. "It's complicated," she said finally. Margaret smiled. "The best things usually are, dear. The best things usually are." The Copper Creek courthouse was packed to the rafters when Judge Samuel Carpenter gavelled the inquest to order. The circuit judge, a lean man with steel-gray whiskers and penetrating eyes, had a reputation for fairness tempered by frontier practicality. He'd been riding the mountain circuit for 15 years, dispensing justice in towns that barely had names. Nathan sat at the front bench, his movements still careful due to the healing wound. Hannah sat beside him, wearing a borrowed dress from Margaret Hoffman, but looking uncomfortable in it, like she'd rather face another gang of outlaws than this crowd of townspeople. Sheriff Morrison stood to one side, hat in hand, ready to present his findings. "This is an inquest, not a trial," Judge Carpenter began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "We're here to determine the facts surrounding the deaths of 12 men in the mountains, and whether criminal charges are warranted." He looked directly at Nathan and Hannah. "You two are not accused of anything, yet, but I'll hear testimony under oath." The judge called Sheriff Morrison first. The lawman laid out the facts methodically. The attack on the Weiss homestead, the deaths of Hannah's parents and brother, her abduction, then the discovery of bodies at various locations in the mountains, all members of the gang led by Marcus Briggs. "And what did you find at these locations, Sheriff?" "Signs of fighting, sir. Defensive positions. Spent cartridges. At the Eagle's Rest mine. We found evidence of prepared positions, like someone was expecting attack. Not running, but making a stand." "Yes, sir, and—" Morrison hesitated. "We also found evidence the gang had been harassing other homesteads. Goods taken from the Watson place, the Hendricks Ranch. These weren't just drifters. Judge, they were organized raiders." Harold Weaver stood up from the gallery. "If I may, Your Honor." "You may not." Judge Carpenter cut him off. "Sit down, Mr. Weaver. You'll have your chance if called." Next came Dr. Hoffman, who testified to Nathan's injuries and Hannah's condition when they arrived. The young lady showed signs of rough treatment from her captivity. Healing bruises, rope burns on her wrists. Mr. Walker's wound was serious, the kind you get in close fighting when a man's trying to kill you, not capture you. Then it was Hannah's turn. She stood straight, chin up, and told her story in a clear voice. The attack on her family's ranch, watching her father and brother cut down, her mother's screams, her own captivity and the daily degradations, told in careful language that left no doubt while sparing the crowd explicit details. "Mr. Walker found me chained to a post like an animal," she said. "He risked his life to free me, everything that followed. We were hunted. They gave us no choice but to defend ourselves." "Miss Weiss," Judge Carpenter said gently, "did you participate in the killings?" "I did." No hesitation. "I learned to shoot. When they came for us, I shot back. I won't apologize for it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Women didn't typically admit to such things so baldly. And Marcus Briggs specifically? Hannah's eyes hardened. "He was reaching for a weapon. I shot him before he could draw it." "She saved my life," Nathan interjected, earning a sharp look from the judge. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Walker." When Nathan did testify, he kept his answers short and direct. Yes, he'd tracked the gang. Yes, he'd freed Hannah. Yes, they'd been pursued and forced to fight. No, he felt no remorse for men who preyed on innocent families. "You could have come to town, raised a posse," Judge Carpenter suggested. "By the time I got here and back, she'd have been dead or sold south," Nathan replied bluntly. "And posses are loud. They'd have heard us coming, scattered into the mountains, maybe caught again later, maybe not." The judge called several more witnesses. Tom Brennan, a trapper, testified he'd seen the gang's camp swollen to over 20 men before the fight at Eagle's Rest. Whatever Walker and the girl did, it broke them up. Haven't seen hide nor hair the ones that ran. Maria Santos, who ran the boarding house, testified that Briggs had threatened her when she wouldn't extend credit. He said he'd burn my place like he'd done the Weiss Ranch, said nobody could stop him. Finally, something unexpected. Robert Standing Bear, a Ute who sometimes scouted for the Army, asked to speak. Judge Carpenter allowed it, over Weaver's loud objection. "These men Briggs led," Standing Bear said in careful English. "They were cast out from my people and others, violated sacred laws, harmed women and children. In our way, they were already dead men walking. The mountain spirits used these two." He gestured to Nathan and Hannah. To balance the scales, the testimony took most of the day. When it concluded, Judge Carpenter called a recess, retiring to Sheriff Morrison's office to consider. The crowd milled about, some supporting Nathan and Hannah, others muttering about law and order. Harold Weaver cornered Hannah outside. "You've made this town look lawless. Young woman, running around like some Wild West show performer. What would your poor mother think?" "My mother is dead," Hannah said quietly. "Murdered by men the law couldn't or wouldn't stop. So I'll thank you not to invoke her memory to shame me for surviving." When court reconvened, Judge Carpenter's expression was grave. "I've considered the testimony and evidence carefully. The law is clear. Taking life outside legal authority is murder, regardless of provocation." He paused as tension filled the room. "However, the law also recognizes self-defense and the defense of others." He looked at Nathan and Hannah. "Every killing described here occurred during pursuit or attack by armed men known to be criminals. You were not hunting for sport or vengeance, but defending your lives against continuing aggression. Furthermore, the complete absence of effective law enforcement in the High Country created circumstances where citizens had no recourse but self-help." Another pause. "It is the finding of this court that all killings were legally justified as self-defense. No charges will be filed." The crowd erupted. Cheers from some, angry protests from others. Judge Carpenter gavelled for order. "However," he continued, and the room quieted, "this court cannot condone vigilante action as a general principle. Therefore, Mr. Walker, you will sign a bond of peace, should you engage in any similar actions in the future. When proper law enforcement is available and capable of responding, you will face the full weight of the law." "Understood, Your Honor," Nathan said. "Miss Weiss, the same applies to you. The frontier may sometimes require desperate measures, but civilization demands we put aside the gun when the gavel can serve." He looked around the room. "This territory is changing. The wild days are ending. What was necessary yesterday may be criminal tomorrow. Remember that, all of you." He brought the gavel down one final time. "This inquest is closed." Outside, the town seemed divided. Some approached to shake hands and offer support. Others turned away, muttering about dangerous precedents. Sheriff Morrison pulled Nathan aside. "Judge did you a favor, but he's right about things changing. The railroad's coming through next year. There'll be federal marshals, territorial police, the old ways." He shrugged. "Just something to think about." Hannah stood in the street, looking lost despite the legal vindication. The dress felt foreign, the town smaller than before. She'd gotten justice of a sort. But what came next? "I need to see the ranch," she said suddenly to Nathan. "What's left of it?" They rode out that afternoon, against Dr. Hoffman's protests about Nathan's wound. The Weiss homestead was a blackened scar on the land. The barn had collapsed completely, the house just charred timbers and stone chimney. Weeds already grew through the ashes. Hannah dismounted, walking slowly through the ruins. She paused at what had been the kitchen door, where her mother had stood calling them for supper, knelt where her father's workshop had been, where he'd taught her to oil leather and mend harness. "They wanted to build something lasting," she said quietly. "Papa talked about the grandchildren who'd worked this land. Nathan dismounted carefully, came to stand beside her. Land still here. Could rebuild. Could I? She looked around at the graves on the small hill, marked with simple wooden crosses. Every sunrise, I'd see those graves. Every sunset, I'd remember. She was quiet for a long moment, then squared her shoulders. No, this chapter's closed. Papa would understand. He always said the living shouldn't be chained to the dead. What will you do? Hannah turned to face him fully. That depends partly on you. Nathan Walker. We've been partners in war. Question is, can we be partners in peace? Nathan studied her face. The determination still there, but tempered now with something softer. I'm not a farmer. Hannah, don't know if I could be. I'm not asking you to be. There's other ways to live out here. Other things to build. She gestured toward the mountains. You know every trail, every water source, every safe passage. Settlers are going to keep coming. They'll need guides, protection, someone to help them find their place without destroying what's already here. And you? I'm good with wounds. Learned that helping Doc Hoffman. Good with a rifle. Learned that from you. Good with accounts and letters. Learned that from my mother. A ghost of a smile. Seems like skills a frontier business could use. Nathan felt something ease in his chest. A tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Partners, then? Partners. She held out her hand, and he shook it solemnly. Then, because some moments demanded more than handshakes, he pulled her close. She came willingly, her arms wrapping around him, careful of his wound. They stood there among the ruins and graves. Two people forged by violence, but choosing to build something new. The mountains rose around them, eternal and indifferent. But somehow that seemed fitting. The high country had brought them together in blood and desperation. Now maybe it would shelter something better, a future neither could have imagined when this all began. We'll need to find land, Nathan said finally. Something defensible but close enough to the trails. I know a place. Hannah replied. Papa showed me once. Good water, southern exposure, view for miles. They mounted up and rode away from the burned homestead without looking back. The past was ashes and graves. The future waited somewhere ahead. Uncertain but no longer faced alone. Judge Carpenter had been right. The frontier was changing, but perhaps there was still room for those who understood both its wildness and its promise, who could bridge the gap between what was and what would be. Partners forged in hardship, choosing to face whatever came next together. The sun was setting as they rode, painting the mountains gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, wild and free, a reminder that some things would always resist civilization's advance. Hannah and Nathan rode toward that sound, toward the high country that had tested them and would shelter them, toward a future they would build with their own hands. The gavel had fallen. Justice had been served after its fashion. And now, life, real life, not just survival, could begin. The morning frost clung to the pine needles like crushed diamonds as Hannah Weiss stood on the porch of their newly built cabin, watching the sun paint the peaks gold. 6 months had passed since the inquest, 6 months of hard work and careful planning. The rifle she'd once carried everywhere now rested inside above the door, still within reach, but no longer her constant companion. Nathan emerged from the small stable they'd erected, favoring his left side slightly. The wound had healed clean, but cold mornings still brought stiffness. He carried a freshly mended bridle, the leather gleaming with Neat's foot oil. Henderson party should arrive today, he said, joining her on the porch. 8 wagons, heading for the valley beyond Twin Peaks. Hannah nodded, consulting the ledger she kept. Paid in advance for guide service and resupply. I've got their provisions sorted in the storage shed. Their business, Walker and Weiss Frontier Services, had grown faster than either expected. Word spread quickly among the wagon trains. Here was a guide who knew every pass and water source, paired with a woman who could dress wounds, keep accounts, and hit what she aimed at when trouble arose. They offered what desperate travelers needed most, competence and reliability in a land that forgave neither ignorance nor weakness. The cabin sat precisely where Hannah's father had once shown her, a natural bench of land with clear sight lines in all directions, a spring-fed creek running year-round, and quick access to both the main trail and hidden paths only locals knew. They'd built it together, Nathan teaching her the mountain way of construction while she insisted on civilized touches like real glass windows and a proper iron stove. "You're wearing the dress," Nathan observed, a slight smile playing at his lips. Hannah smoothed the practical blue calico, one of the 3 she'd finally commissioned from the seamstress in Copper Creek. "The Henderson party includes women and children. It helps them trust us if I look." She searched for the word, respectable. "You looked plenty respectable in trousers, putting bullets through playing cards at 50 yards. That was different." She turned to face him fully. "We agreed. Nathan, what we did in the mountains, that's finished. We're building something else now." He caught her hand, feeling the calluses that hadn't quite faded, the strength in her grip. "I know. Doesn't mean I've forgotten who you really are under that calico." "Good," she said firmly, "because neither have I." The sound of wagons reached them before the dust did. 8 prairie schooners in a line, oxen plodding steady, outsiders on horseback watching for trouble. Nathan counted heads automatically. 32 people, including 11 children. Good folks by the look of them. Worn by the trail but not broken. Thomas Henderson, the wagon master, swung down from his horse as they approached. A solid man in his 40s with the careful eyes of someone who'd learned not to trust too quickly. "Mr. Walker? We exchanged letters through the post office in Independence." "That's right." Nathan shook his hand. "This is my partner, Miss Weiss. She handles the provisioning and medical needs." Henderson's eyes flicked between them, noting the professional distance they maintained in public, the wedding bands they didn't wear. His wife, Sarah, climbing down from the lead wagon, was less subtle in her assessment. "Partner," she repeated, the word carrying a weight of judgment. "Business partner," Hannah clarified smoothly. "I keep the accounts, manage supplies, and provide medical assistance when needed. Mr. Walker handles guiding and protection." It was the fiction they maintained for propriety's sake. The truth, that they shared the cabin, shared their lives, shared everything but wedding vows, was nobody's business but their own. Some travelers accepted it, others didn't, but their competence usually won out over moral objections. "We'll need to reach Badger Creek by nightfall," Nathan told Henderson. Shifting to business, "It's the last good water before the ascent. Tomorrow we tackle Morrison Pass, steep but manageable if we start early." While Nathan discussed the route with the men, Hannah organized the resupply. Children watched wide-eyed as she efficiently distributed the preserved foods, ammunition, and medical supplies their parents had ordered. She'd added small treats on her own account: peppermint sticks for the children, good soap for the women, tobacco for the men. Small kindnesses that cost little but earned much in goodwill. "You know doctoring?" Sarah Henderson asked, watching Hannah sort medical supplies. "Field medicine. Learned from experience and doctor. Hoffman in Copper Creek." Hannah didn't elaborate on what kind of experience. "I can handle most trail injuries. Breaks, cuts, fever. Anything beyond that. We get them to town fast as possible." The woman relaxed slightly. "My youngest has been poorly. Could you look at her? The child, maybe 6 years old, had the glassy eyes and flushed cheeks of fever." Hannah felt her forehead, checked her throat, asked gentle questions. "Not serious, thank God. Just the grip that often struck travelers when they hit altitude. Willow bark tea for the fever," Hannah prescribed, producing a packet from her supplies. "Keep her warm, but not smothered. She should be fine in a day or 2. The grateful look on Sarah Henderson's face was worth more than payment. It was moments like these that Hannah felt she was building something worthwhile, something her parents would have understood if not entirely approved. The journey through Morrison Pass proved why their services were valuable. Nathan led them up trails that wagons could barely manage but that cut 2 days off the journey. When a wheel cracked on granite, he and Hannah organized repairs with practiced efficiency. when young Johnny Martinez fell from a wagon and broke his arm. Hannah set it clean while Nathan distracted the boy with tales of mountain lions that might or might not have been true. 3 days later, they delivered the Henderson party safe to Badger Valley, where good soil and water promised a fresh start. Thomas Henderson paid the remainder of their fee without complaint, adding a bonus for the doctoring and the peppermint sticks. "You folks ever think of settling permanent?" he asked. "Could use neighbors like you." Nathan and Hannah exchanged glances. They'd had offers before, good land, respected positions in growing communities, but something always held them back. "We're settled where we are," Nathan said finally. "But we'll be through regular, checking on folks, bringing supplies." The ride back to their cabin was quiet, each lost in thought. As they created a rise, their home came into view, small but solid, smoke rising from the chimney where they'd banked the fire before leaving. "Henderson was right," Hannah said suddenly. "We could pick a valley, build something bigger, run cattle maybe, or farm." "Is that what you want?" she considered, then shook her head. "No, I thought it might be once, but this," she gestured at the vast landscape around them. "This suits us. We're neither wild nor tame. Nathan, we're something in between. Bridge builders," he suggested. "Between what was and what's coming." "I like that." They tended the horses in companionable silence, the routine of daily tasks a comfort after days on the trail. Inside, Hannah started supper while Nathan cleaned and oiled their rifles, old habits dying hard. "Letter came while we were gone," Hannah said, producing an envelope from the mantel. "From the territorial governor's office." Nathan's eyebrows rose as he read. "They want to hire us regular, exclusive contract to guide government survey parties, help establish new townships. Good money. Strings attached? Always are." He set the letter aside. "We'd be official, but that means following official rules. No choosing our clients, no turning down jobs we don't like the smell of." Hannah served their simple meal, venison stew, cornbread, preserves she'd put up from wild berries. They ate quietly, thinking through the implications. "We've been lucky," she said finally. "But luck doesn't last forever. The railroad's coming, bringing more people, more law, more complications. Maybe official standing would protect us, or tie our hands when we need them free." It was the perpetual balance they walked, respectability versus independence, safety versus freedom, the same balance that kept them as partners rather than spouses, unwilling to let law and convention define what they'd built together. "We don't have to decide tonight," Hannah said practically. "Governor's not going anywhere." Later, as they sat by the fire, Nathan noticed Hannah cleaning her Springfield, movements automatic from long practice. "Thought you were done with that," he said mildly. "Done using it, not done maintaining it." She glanced at him. "World's not so tame that a woman should forget how to protect herself. Papa taught me that." "You reminded me." Nathan nodded, understanding. They'd chosen peace, but peace was something you maintained, not something you assumed. The mountains had taught them that lesson in blood. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The sound no longer brought tension, just acknowledgement of wildness that would always exist alongside whatever civilization humans built. Hannah finished with the rifle, set it back in its place, and came to sit beside Nathan. "No regrets?" he asked, as he did sometimes when the fire burned low and truth came easier. "None that matter." She leaned into his warmth. "We survived, Nathan. More than that, we found something worth building. The rest is just details." He wrapped an arm around her, careful still of the old wounds that ached in cold weather. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs alike. But inside the small circle of their firelight, two people had carved out a life that belonged to neither wilderness nor civilization, but partook of both. "Freedom has a price," Hannah murmured, drowsy now as the day's travels caught up. "Papa used to say that, but he also said it was worth paying." "Your father was a wise man. He would have liked you, I think, after he got over wanting to shoot you for compromising his daughter's reputation." Nathan chuckled. Good thing I'm a fair hand at dodging bullets. Good thing indeed. The fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more travelers to guide, decisions to make about the governor's offer, the constant work of maintaining their delicate position between worlds. But tonight, they were simply Nathan and Hannah, two people who'd found each other in violence and chosen to build something better. The coyotes called again, closer now, and Hannah stirred. Promise me something. What's that? If trouble comes again, the kind we can't avoid or talk our way past, we face it together. No noble sacrifices, no protecting each other by separation. Together or not at all. Nathan tightened his hold on her. Together or not at all. He agreed. It was the only vow they'd ever exchanged. Spoken not in a church, but in a cabin built by their own hands. Witnessed not by a preacher, but by the mountains that had brought them together. It was enough. More than enough. As the fire died to embers and they made their way to bed, Hannah paused at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, other desperate souls were struggling across the harsh landscape, seeking their own promised lands. Tomorrow, perhaps, she and Nathan would help some of them find it. But tonight, she was home. Not the home she'd been born to or the one she'd lost, but the one she'd chosen and built and defended. A home at the edge of wilderness, where civilization's rules bent but didn't break, where two unlikely partners had written their own definitions of love and duty and freedom. The mountains kept their silence, holding close the secrets of all who'd passed through their shadows, and in a small cabin on a defensible ridge, two people who'd learned the hardest lessons those mountains could teach settled in for another night, grateful for the peace they'd earned and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Because that's what love looked like on the frontier, not pretty words or grand gestures, but standing watch while your partner slept, sharing the load when the trail got steep, and choosing each other again each morning when the sun painted the peaks gold and the world seemed full of dangerous possibilities. It wasn't the life either had planned, but it was the life they'd built, and that, as Hannah's father would have said, made all the difference. Thank you for listening to this tale from the American frontier. If you enjoyed this story of courage, survival, and unexpected love in the Wild West, we'd love to hear where you're listening from. Whether it's during your commute in New York, on a ranch in Texas, or perhaps somewhere across the ocean. Please subscribe to our channel From Wild West for more authentic stories of the American frontier. And share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Nathan and Hannah's journey? Your engagement helps us bring more of these historical tales to life.